Alright, what's up, math minions? Our next lesson, as we continue to talk about solving trig equations, is going to have to do with factoring the greatest common factor and then using our zero product property like we did last time. So we've got a little step we've got to have to add on before we can jump into some of our solving. Okay, so let's review a couple things first. When we talk about factoring a greatest common factor, we talk about taking an expression where they have some multiplication in common. A factor is something that's getting multiplied, and I should probably spell this right, factor. Okay, they have some multiplication in common. Okay, so for example, here I have 2x plus 6. Well, both of these things have a times 2 in common. This is a 2 times an x, and this could be seen as a 2 times a 3. They have a common factor of 2. Okay, and it's the greatest common factor that they have. So what we do is we can factor that out. We can take something that's not a multiplication and turn it into a multiplication. Okay, this is something you did in Algebra 1, you did some more in Algebra 2. But you look at what do they have in common. Each of these terms, each of these separate terms has a different common, they have a common factor to both of them. There's a times 2 in both of them, so we can factor that out, write it out front, and in parentheses write down what is left. Okay, we're going to do that same thing with our trig equations. Okay, so let's look at our first example here. Okay, we want to solve for x. There's no x, but it's theta. Same thing for us. Okay, so what we want to do is, like we've been doing, we want to get it to a point where we can look something up. So first thing should be we need to get it equal to 0. Okay, and again, you should be taking notes on this. If you're just watching it to watch it, you're not doing yourself any justice. You're not doing yourself any good. You need to be taking notes. Pause the video, get some paper, bring it back up when you're ready to start again. Okay, copy this stuff down. All right, so we want to get this thing equal to 0. Right now, the easiest way to do it is to move this negative sign. If I want to move negative sign to the other side, I'm going to be adding sign to both sides. Okay. Now, I cannot add it to this because this is a multiplication, and in order to add it to this, I have to have the same things being multiplied, and I don't. So all I end up with is cosine of theta, sine of theta, plus sine of theta. Okay, but now the right side is equal to 0. So that's our first job. Okay, set it equal to 0. Okay, next, we're going to factor out the greatest common factor. Both of these terms, and there's two separate terms, the plus sign is separating out the two terms. They both, this and this, both have a sine as a factor. This is cosine times sine, and this I can say is 1 times sine. Okay, so they have a common factor of sine, so I'm going to factor that out. So I factor out sine from this, and all I'm going to have left is cosine. Then I have a plus sign. If I factor out sine from this, I still have to say there's a 1 there. Okay. Now we're back to doing what we did yesterday. Now we're going to use the zero product property, which means because I'm multiplying and it equals 0, I can set each factor equal to 0. Okay. Because I'm multiplying and it equals 0, I can set each factor equal to 0. So I'm going to say sine of theta equals 0, and then I'm going to say cosine of theta plus 1 equals 0. Okay, now we need to see, are we at the stage where we can look things up? Okay, so now we're going to solve each equation here. So at this point, I can solve this. I can look up when does sine equal 0. So I go to my trig formula chart. When does sine equal 0? It equals 0 there, and then it equals 0 here at pi, and then again at 2 pi. But again, we're not going to use the 2 pi because it's just the same thing as 0. So we said sine is equal to 0 at 0 and at pi. Okay, this one's not ready to look up because of that plus 1. So now we're back to doing what we've been doing with our little tiny equations. We get it to the point where we can look it up. We subtract 1 from both sides, and now this says cosine of theta equals -1. Okay, well, let's go look that up now. When does cosine equal -1? Again, here's our cosine. When does it equal -1? Right here at pi. And that's it. Oops. This solution is only pi. Okay. Now, notice that pi happened twice. Remember, if a solution repeats, we do not list it twice. So then our answer is that theta, or x, equals 0 and pi. Remember, when we put these in there, we go from smallest to greatest, and we leave a comma and a space between each one. So if we're putting this in Canvas, it'd be 0, comma, space, pi. Okay? All right, let's do one more example. It's going to be very similar to this. Okay? Same thing we want to do. We want to use this as our guide. We're going to set it equal to 0. We're going to set it equal to 0, then we're going to factor out the greatest common factor, set each factor equal to 0, and then solve each equation. Okay? So first thing that needs to happen, we got to get it equal to 0. Okay? Getting it equal to 0 means moving that 2 cosine over to the other side. So we're going to subtract the 2 cotangent from both sides. 2 cotangent. So I have cotangent of x, cosine squared of x minus 2 cotangent x equals 0. Okay. Next, factor out the greatest common factor. What do they have in common? Well, they both have a cotangent as a factor. So what are we going to do with that? We're going to factor out cotangent. We have cotangent of x, and then what we're left with is cosine squared of x minus 2 equals 0. Factored out the cotangent, wrote it out front one time, write down what's left. Now we set each factor equal to 0. Cotangent of x equals 0, and cosine squared of x minus 2 equals 0. Right? Okay. Now, when does cotangent equal 0? Let's go look. Figure it out. Cotangent equals 0 here and here. So pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. Pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. Okay. All right, so now let's go to this one. This one says cosine squared minus 2 equals 0. So we are going to first add 2. So cosine squared equals 2. Okay, we can't look up cosine squared, but we can look up cosine, so that means how do we get rid of the square? Get rid of the square with a square root. We'll square root both sides. Okay, remember our rules. So if we square root both sides, we have to automatically put down plus or minus. Okay, since this has no fraction, we don't have to worry about square rooting the top and square rooting the bottom separately. So this is just cosine of x equals plus or minus square root of 2. Okay, let's go look that up. Where does cosine equal square root of 2? Well, that can't be it because that's square root of 2 over 2. There's a negative. Does cosine ever equal square root of 2? No, it doesn't. So this part has no solutions. Okay, so our only solutions are going to come from this part, which means when we type it into Canvas, it's pi over 2, comma, space, 3 pi over 2. Okay, oops, I should write that as I'm going to put it into Canvas. So that would be space 3 pi slash 2. Okay, that's it. Remember to set everything equal to 0, factor out the greatest common factor, set each factor equal to 0 because now you have a zero product property situation, and then you're going to solve each equation. All right, we'll see you in class. Come with